Hello, everyone. This is the second in a series of review videos for preparation for our final exam. Be focusing on utilitarianism. Again, remember that the final exam will consist of several hypothetical scenarios along the lines of the ones that we've already been working with, and that your job in each case will be to write an ethical analysis, but that will be a Kantian ethical analysis, or utilitarian ethical analysis, or an ethical analysis employing some of the principles or methods of Thompson or Marquis or Singer or Arthur. So it's not like the cold look that we did where we just, write our own ethical analyses. You have to employ the principles from these different philosophers. So that's the idea. So you want to be ready to do that. And one of the things you need to do is to write a utilitarian analysis, which in some ways is quite simple. I would at least say as simple as doing a Kantian analysis, which is basically writing a reasoned application of the categorical imperatives. Again, a reasoned, argued for application of the categorical imperatives. Here, really, all you really need to do is to apply the greatest happiness principle. However, as we talked about in class, and you have to sort of remember what the class was, not just these videos, obviously, but the greatest happiness principle is not put in the form of a rule like the categorical imperatives. You have to sort of shape it into a rule. And let me just explain what I mean. This is from chapter 2 of Mill's Utilitarianism. The creed which accepts as the foundation of morals, utility, or the greatest happiness principle, holds that, and here's the key part, actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. By happiness is intended pleasure, and the absence of pain; by unhappiness, pain, and the privation of pleasure. The privation, the taking away of pleasure. Right? Okay, so that's basically the principle there. But obviously, that's not a rule to apply. That's a definition of right and wrong, but it's not a practical rule. You have to sort of shape it, and it's pretty easy to shape it into an imperative or rule to actually apply it to a given situation. If actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, and if they're wrong, to the degree that they promote unhappiness, then we can pretty easily shape it into a kind of a practical rule to apply. Always do that which promotes the greatest amount of happiness and the least amount of unhappiness, or always do that which lessens happiness to the least degree, or that lessens unhappiness to the greatest degree. You can sort of change it around as needed. But one of the things that we called it in class, and one thing maybe that helps to keep in mind when you're trying to apply this principle, is the idea of maximizing happiness and minimizing unhappiness. Obviously, as he says, by happiness is meant pleasure, and unhappiness pain. So if we change the greatest happiness principle, or the basic principle of utility, what he calls the greatest happiness principle, into a rule to be applied, the best result, or the best thing we can do, the best approach in any situation, would be the actions which actually maximize the happiness of everyone concerned and minimize their unhappiness, whichever is more relevant, maximizing happiness or minimizing unhappiness. So keeping that in mind, I suppose, always do that which maximizes the happiness of everyone whose interests are concerned and minimizes their unhappiness. Obviously, if that's the way that we're approaching things as utilitarians, this is a consequentialist approach. Sorry, I've Misspelled consequentialist. I'm supposed to be a philosophy teacher. There we go. So if we're going to be strict utilitarians with no Kantian or other approach, then we only care about results. We only care about the consequences, the outcomes of an action. We don't care about intent. We don't care about goodwill. We don't care about duty. We don't care about the moral law. All we care about when it comes to assessing what the right thing to do is in a particular situation is what the results are. And just to clarify that, the ones that matter, the results that matter, the ones that have ethical significance are the ones that impact on human welfare. And by human welfare, just human well-being. So that they impact on the happiness and unhappiness of human beings. So once we adjust the greatest happiness principle in the required ways to make it into an imperative, a rule, always do this, always do that, it becomes, I think, fairly clear what utilitarian analysis is. Now, of course, in any particular analysis, the difficulty is assessing what the relevant outcomes and results are, and that's where you have to use your judgment, right? Just like you need to use your judgment in assessing whose interests are actually at stake, that is, whose welfare, whose happiness and unhappiness is bound to be affected by this situation, right? It's the greatest happiness principle, but so you can't just take your own happiness into account. You have to take everyone's happiness into account, and you have to take it into account in this neutral way, right? And if we know anything about Mill, general rule of thumb is that my happiness you can't be selfish about it. You have to be absolutely neutral. That's why he says one of the reasons he says utilitarianism may sound too demanding, because it does require that you be willing to sacrifice your own happiness if that's what the principle calls for. The principle calls for you to maximize happiness. And if that means that you are adversely affected, that's just the way it is, right? If the greatest overall happiness will be achieved by making you unhappy, then I suppose you have to be willing to be made unhappy. You have to be willing to make sacrifices, things like that. So, yes, that's, I think, what the basic thing, these are the basic things you need to have in mind when you do a utilitarian analysis. But let me just say, as a general proviso, that I'm relying upon your knowledge, your reading knowledge of Kant and Mill in doing this. That is, I'm not saying that if you listen to what I say in these videos, you'll be totally prepared for the exam. No, you've been preparing for the exam the whole semester, and by doing the readings. So I'm just reviewing the basics. There is plenty of nuance and other things that are bound to be left unsaid. But that's, you should be looking over Kant and you should be looking over Mill to have a more informed and assured approach to things. But I think what I've said in this video is these are definitely the basics.